Good evening, Erev Tov, boa noite, and to all our audience in Portugal, Israel, and around the world. Welcome to Unlocking, a Portuguese-Israeli literary event. The Hebrew Writers Association in Israel organizes this initiative in collaboration with the Embassy of Portugal and with the Camões Institute of Language and Culture. My name is David Rospina, and together with Dr. Dorit Silverman, the Vice Chairman of the Hebrew Writers Association, I will moderate this event. Before we introduce tonight's guest speakers, I would like to invite Zvika Nir, the Chairman of the Hebrew Writers Association in Israel, to say the opening words.
Good evening, everybody. Your Excellency, the Ambassador of Portugal to Israel, George Cabral, Dr. Dorit Silverman, my Vice Deputy, my right hand, David Rospina, who initiated this meeting, dear friends, all writers all around the world, as you said, David, mainly from Israel and Portugal. And the Hebrew Writers Association encourages all kinds of connections and relationships with writers organization across the world. Before the Corona era, we used to host almost every month writers from abroad, mainly from Europe. Basically, most of the writers of Israel had many origins of cultures. Sami Berdugo and Dan Karlibach, I think they have some North African culture. I myself was born in Romania, Transylvania, Hungary and Romania. Dorit has Slovakian culture, origin. So we are always a mixture of culture, especially from Europe. Therefore, I encourage very much the concept of this meeting, and many thanks to all the organizers. I read about a wonderful initiative of Ana Margarida Carvalho, I hope I pronounced rightly the name, in Portugal, to gather some dozen of the Portuguese writers during the Corona lockdown to cooperate on a kind of cooperation or cooperative novel, where every chapter in the novel is written by a different writer day by day. Maybe during this meeting, we'll hear from her and she'll elaborate about how she succeeded in that unique project. And maybe I'm addressing now the Portuguese writers, maybe you don't know, but there is a love story between the writers of Portugal and the Israeli readers. Not just Saramago, which is obvious, but very much Fernando Pessoa. I myself visited his house about 3 or 4 years ago in Lisbon, but also others, for example, Lydia George, and even Elsa de Queiroz, which only this year I read again his great novel. In Hebrew, it was translated the name Maya House, which is a very good and famous novel all around the world and even in Israel. Unfortunately, my Portuguese language is very poor. And the only words which I remember and know is pastel de nata or pastel de Belém. Oh, and you understand that, and especially the taste of that. But I understand a little bit. And I wish to all of us an interesting conversation. And I hope that very soon we will be able to meet personally and shake hands. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zvika Nir. I would now like to introduce His Excellency Jorge Cabral, the Ambassador of Portugal in Israel.
Distintos membros da Associação Hebraica de Escritores, ilustres escritores e convidados, minhas senhoras e meus senhores, caros ouvintes. É com muita honra que estou hoje aqui a participar neste evento literário, na minha qualidade de embaixador de Portugal e Israel. Não resistindo a falar em português, quero começar por agradecer ao Chairman of the Hebrew Writers Association, Sr. Tzavika Nir, as suas amáveis palavras, colaboração e hospitalidade com que nos acolhem todos hoje aqui. Agradeço também à doutora Dorit Silverman por todos os esforços realizados para que este primeiro podcast literário de Portugal e Israel pudesse acontecer. Toda a Rabá Labeit HaSofrim pela disponibilidade de co-produzir connosco este projeto intitulado Unlocking a Portuguese Israeli Literary Podcast, permitindo deste modo que num momento tão crucial como este que ainda vivemos, possamos levar palavras de esperança no rápido desconfinamento, unlocking, porque todos tanto ansiamos. Havendo fundadas razões para acreditar que existe finalmente alguma luz ao fundo do túnel. Quero deixar igualmente uma palavra de agradecimento aos autores portugueses aqui presentes, alguns deles já meus conhecidos, Ana Margarida de Carvalho, Matilde Campinho e José Luís Peixoto, bem como aos autores israelitas Shrifra Horn, Galitan Carlibar e Sami Berdugo, por terem aceito o desafio para participarem neste importante encontro que todos esperamos possa ser o primeiro de muitos que se seguirão. Creio que esta iniciativa poderá ser uma excelente oportunidade to offer a response from Portuguese and Israeli writers that are seeing similar things with different eyes in different locations of the world. Espero bem que esta troca de experiências, por intermédio da interação literária entre os dois países, possa despertar o interesse e a curiosidade dos ouvintes, contribuindo para criar um movimento de renovação dos laços literários entre Israel e Portugal. Tendo chegado a Israel há relativamente pouco tempo, tem sido para mim uma experiência muito rica e muito estimulante ir desvendando aos poucos os diversos traços de identidade, dos quais a forte e rica tradição literária é seguramente um dos importantes exemplos. É uma especial satisfação que participo nesta iniciativa. Acredito que nestes tempos asfixiantes e despersonalizados, em que nos cobrimos de máscaras e nos refugiamos em impostos distanciamentos, a literatura, seja ela em prosa ou poesia, as palavras e as ideias estarão ainda mais relevantes e mais fortes do que alguma vez foram, porque nos trazem literalmente uma lufada de ar fresco, transportando-nos para realidades imundos e sonhos sem fronteiras nem amarras. Todos vivemos um ano de grandes desafios, sendo que este é, para Portugal, um semestre particularmente exigente, já que assumimos a presidência rotativa do Conselho da União Europeia, responsabilidade que, mais uma vez, procuraremos honrar, prestando o nosso melhor contributo no quadro europeu e, antes de mais, na luta contra a terrível pandemia que a todos ainda assola. No momento em que o valor da solidariedade assume uma relevância única, teremos também que, em conjunto, começar já a preparar o futuro. Assim, a abertura deste evento reveste-se particular significado para nós, já que o fazemos enquanto presidência portuguesa. Fazemos-lo com grande entusiasmo e otimismo, num momento de grandes desafios e relevantes mudanças a nível mundial, mas também num momento de esperança, trazida pela recente e progressiva abertura das atividades económicas, antes de mais em Israel. Com a convicção de que os laços entre Portugal e o Estado de Israel continuarão a desenvolver-se e a aprofundar-se. Aliás, nos últimos anos assistimos a uma fervilhante redescoberta mútua entre os dois povos, que em boa hora envolveu também empresas, universidades e sociedade civil em geral. Aumentámos o turismo entre os dois países, abrimos ligações aéreas diretas que, por sua vez, potenciaram a circulação de pessoas, conectámos empresas, universidades, aumentámos a cooperação tecnológica e científica. Relacionamento bilateral que igualmente se consolidou em áreas tão diversificadas como a defesa, ciberterrorismo, empreendedorismo e agrotecnologia. São essas conquistas que não queremos perder e pelas quais iremos trabalhar diariamente. Podemos dizer que as relações de Portugal e o Estado de Israel são hoje excelentes, mas queremos mais, queremos diversificar, queremos ir mais longe. Portugal recebe cada ano que passa um número crescente de cidadãos provenientes de Israel que se deslocam a Portugal com motivações tão diversas como a realização de negócios, investimentos, estudo, pesquisa ou inovação. Ou simplesmente para passeios pelos percursos e terras marcadas pela herança judaica, ou experiência de surf, de música ou de gastronomia. Agora é a vez da literatura. E este podcast será com certeza o primeiro passo em busca da literatura perdida, ou um unlocking no âmbito literário. Um momento ideal para incentivarmos a tradução de autores contemporâneos portugueses, a exemplo do que já sucede com José Luís Peixoto, entre alguns outros, já traduzidos e conhecidos do público israelita. Contamos, pois, para isso com a colaboração de todos os membros da Hebrew Writers Association e de todos quantos nos escutam. E acredito que temos ferramentas bastantes para tal. O Instituto Camões possui, como alguns saberão, um programa especial de apoio à tradução que divulgamos todos os anos nas nossas páginas e redes sociais. E nós, na Embaixada de Portugal em Tel Aviv, estaremos sempre prontos para responder a todos quantos estejam interessados em colaborar para a concretização desse objetivo. Gostava de poder ver aqui, num futuro não muito distante, os livros de Matilde Campinho ou da Ana Margarida Carvalho e de tantas outras vozes importantes que poderão, tenho a certeza, contribuir para que a componente relevante da cultura portuguesa seja aqui mais conhecida. Estimulando o interesse pela literatura portuguesa em Israel e pela literatura israelita em Portugal, principalmente agora quando tantos israelitas têm em Portugal, escolhem a sua segunda morada. Diria que não posso concordar mais com a reflexão da Ana Margarida de Carvalho ao afirmar: I thought it might be more interesting to break the walls around us through literature than bypass the social isolation. Convido-os, pois, a acompanhar as atividades que desenvolvemos diariamente nas áreas culturais, comerciais e turísticas e também consulares. Convido-os também a acederem às nossas redes sociais, onde igualmente divulgamos informações atualizadas e notícias importantes sobre Portugal. Todos vivemos tempos de particular dificuldade e pesados desafios, mas estou certo que juntos saberemos trabalhar para vencer as adversidades do momento, dando continuidade ao caminho da união e proximidade entre os nossos dois povos e países. Contem para isso com a minha total disponibilidade e empenho, assim como a da equipa desta embaixada. Quero desejar a todos uma boa noite e um ótimo Unlocking Podcast. Atrevendo-me a citar Dante na sua última estrofe do capítulo do Inferno, terminaria dizendo: And we came outside and we saw the stars again. Tehenu shalom lekulam.
It's a great honor to hear the opening remarks of His Excellency, the Ambassador. I'd like to thank Madame Ambassador Rita Cabral for being with us tonight. Our event is dedicated to the subject unlocking from physical and social lockdown to cultural and mental lockdown. To begin, Dr. Dorit Silverman, the Vice Chairman of the Hebrew Writers Association in Israel, whose books were translated into several languages, including Portuguese, will share some thoughts on the subject. Dorit?
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Good evening to Tzvi Kanir, the head, the chairman of the Hebrew Writers Association, His Excellency, the Ambassador, dear writers, dear readers, good evening. A lockdown at home is a good opportunity to write. I wonder why so many writers share now the pandemic has stifled their imagination. The Guardian even called it blockdown. If the first lockdown was about finding space to write, the second has been far bleaker and harder for creativity. Whether it is dealing with homeschooling, the same for walls, or anxiety caused by the news, for many authors, the stories just aren't coming. As other authors were busy with processing what's going on in the world, some others describe waking up in a fog and not wanting to do any but watch rubbish TV. Their mind is not relaxed enough to connect with the subconscious. They don't have the emotional and the intellectual energy to give to create. Of all the people to be complaining about not being able to work, writers feel like the strangest group because compared to everyone else, our lives have changed the least. The irony about it is that we spend our lives saying, if only we could be locked away in a cave, then inspiration and deadlines would not be a problem. And then it happens, and it's a disaster. So this evening, we talk with our writers about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorit. I would now like to introduce José Luís Peixoto, a prize-winning novelist. He has a vast work in fiction, non-fiction, poetry, and children's literature. He has received several Portuguese and international awards, such as the José Saramago Literary Award, the Livro de Europa, Oceanos Literature Award, was shortlisted for the International Impact Dublin Literary Award and the Feminine Prize. His novels are translated into more than 30 languages, including The Cemetery of Pianos in Hebrew. Good evening, José. I heard you are about to publish a new novel, and I'm curious, tell us, will it serve as your unlocking? José, probably you are on mute.
I'm sorry. This is such a classic mistake on Zoom. So first of all, hello, everybody. Shalom. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me. I wish that very soon we may be able to be closer, even though this is actually a good thing that we will take out of these lockdowns, this usage of technology that gives us the possibility to be in contact in such a practical way, actually. I can really relate to what Dorit Silberman was saying about the difficulties of writing in this period, because there is such a sense of claustrophobia, even though, as she was also saying, we are probably not the ones who can complain the most, or who should complain the most about this. And actually, I have taken this time to work. Work has been a bit the way that I used to deal with all this situation. So last year, for example, I published a poetry book, which was something very important for me and was completely unplanned, because I mean, poetry is very important for me, and in Portugal, poetry is more present than in some countries, maybe. But a sign of how things were for me in terms of writing poetry is the fact that my last poetry collection had been published 12 years ago, and so it was something that actually was born out of this lockdown, that for me it was very positive, and that gave me a lot of pleasure. And as you were saying, there is also this novel that I had started writing before lockdown, before COVID. Actually, it was I interrupted the writing of it for a few months, but then after I became a bit more used to this situation, it was a bit of an escape, and a bit of it was very helpful to have this parallel world in which I could go and be there for a while. Actually, now that I have ended it, now that it's over, I feel a bit orphaned, and I need to find a new project very soon.
Oh, but this book is coming out in 2021, right?
This book is coming out in about 3 weeks. It was all very, very, very fast. Also, on those terms, it was also touched by this situation. It was touched on by this situation, but on a way that is completely unusual, because COVID and the pandemic, as far as the publishing houses are concerned, has delayed a lot of editions. But in this case, I had a meeting with my editor a few months ago, and we decided to publish it right now. It's a bit of a risky move, and to give you an idea, this publisher that publishes about 10 to 15 books a month is now publishing only 2 books in the month of March. My novel and another novel that is a bit of a classic here in Portugal called Esteiros by an author called Sueiro Pereira Gomes. Yeah. And these are, it's very unusual for this publishing house to have only 2 books. But I think it's also maybe a way of communicating some hope to move on with this novel in particular. Of course, it's just a little drop in this ocean of problems that we are all dealing with, but we thought it was something that we should do, and so it's going to be published really fast.
Thank you, Dorit.
Okay, my turn. I want to introduce Miss Shifa Horn. Shifa Horn lives in Jerusalem and in New Zealand, has a first degree in biblical studies, archaeology, and communication. She's also a journalist, lecturer, and has worked as spokesperson of the Ministry of Absorption. Horn wrote 6 novels, 4 non-fiction books, and 4 children's books. Horn has received many prizes both in Israel and other countries. Her books have been translated into English, French, Dutch, German, Italian, Estonian, Azeri, Spanish, Catalan, and Turkish. And I want to ask you, Shifa Horn, what was the lockdown for you?
Listen, Dorit, as a writer, I'm used to be isolated. That's what you said. In order to write, we have to isolate ourselves. But during the Corona time, I get used to new vocabularies that everything has to do with isolation. Think about closure or social distance, quarantine, curfew, night curfew, lockdown, isolation, and compulsory isolation. Right now, I'm under compulsory isolation in New Zealand in a hotel very close to the airport. And I'm almost climbing the walls. And as you said, I get poisoned by TV shows, which I was not supposed to watch. And 3 days ago, while I was thinking what I'm going to talk in this assembly, I have an epiphany. And I would like to share it with you because exactly a year ago, at March the 5th, 2020, I did all the way back to Israel from Auckland, which I live about 3 months in a year. I made all the way back through South Africa, which was half the world, in order to publish my new novel, a new novel that I worked on for about 8 years. And the epiphany is that all of a sudden, when I edited my novel, I realized that the heroine, which her name is Alexandra, is a writer. The novel is written in ars poetical way. And Alexandra is married and have no children. And she decided to leave the house and her husband and lock herself in a room opposite to the walls of Jerusalem, in Mishkenot Shananim, in order to finish her book. And she locked herself for a year. And this is a novel that I worked, and it was supposed to be published exactly a year ago. That's why I did all the way back to Israel. The novel was not published because when I came back to Israel, I noticed that all of a sudden I noticed that my editor just resigned and my publishing company was under a lockdown because of the corona. What happened is that I stayed in Israel for a year, from 5th of March till 5th of March, exactly a year. And it was away from my husband, away from my loved ones in Israel, because like everybody over 60s, and I couldn't write. Even to write a grocery list for a supermarket was very hard for me. The computer was frozen as I was frozen. I got poisoned by Netflix, and I actually did nothing. For a year, it's a waste of a year. As you said, we always dream about a cave where we can crawl inside and write and write and write. I got the opportunity. I had the whole house for myself. I didn't have kids running around. I didn't have to cook because I ate whatever I wanted, but I didn't write even one word. So since then, I had lots of difficulties to come back to New Zealand, to my husband. We used to talk about 10 times a day in a Zoom, in a WhatsApp, in all the means that we had. And I did all the way back on 5th of March, exactly a year after, back to New Zealand. And I can define my situation now. I'm in a lockdown or curfew or whatever you think about. I'm in a leper colony. As we say in Latin, leprosarium. I feel like a leper. In a tiny little room next to the airport of Auckland. I'm not allowed to leave the room. Once a day, the nurse comes and takes my temperature. I have 3 corona tests in about 10 days. And we are the new untouchable of the modern world, even though I got the vaccine. And I kept on telling the New Zealanders, listen, I have the vaccination twice. I have a green passport. We are lepers under one roof in one hotel. They give us food outside of the door. The food is quite horrible, I have to admit. And we are surrounded with 3 rows of fences, and we are allowed to go outside for half an hour every day. So, and I cannot write. I have the whole condition. They bring my food. I'm locked. I'm in isolation, but I'm frozen and I cannot write. My book is not going to publish now because we have no idea when the corona will end. It's a book that I worked on for about 8 years. And this is my situation. And I got a kind of, again, another epiphany, which I cannot understand. I think that I felt that maybe it will be my last book, because I would like to live my life. I don't want to be anymore in isolation. I don't want to sit down for 8 years and write another novel. In my age, I would like to live. I would like to love. I want to feel the wind on my skin. I want to go and lie under the sunshine. I want to read books. And it's quite strange for me that I really don't care whether my book will be published or not published at all. So this is my situation right now.
Listen, Shifra, dear Shifra, your story is almost make me cry. And
no,
I know
don't cry.
I tell you something. First, you dictate your destiny by writing this book about Alexandra, that you locked her up for a year.
By the way, Dorit, just to one remark, Alexandra is my second name.
Oh, okay.
Yes, Sasha Alexandra, yeah.
Wow. So let me remind you, I know you like a lot of years, and I remember, more than once that you said, I hope I'm afraid, or I hope, or I need, or I want that this would be my last book. So yeah, I know the feeling, and I wish you a lot more books. But first of all, I wish you to meet your husband again. This is the most important.
I have 11 more days to stay here, to be here. I count the days like a prisoner.
And then after a year, you meet him. So thank you very much, Shifa Horn and David.
Thank you.
Wow. That's hard to follow. I would like to introduce Ana Margarida de Carvalho. Her novels were awarded several prizes, and she is the only author to receive the Portuguese Writers Association Award twice. During Corona, she developed Bode Inspiratório, a leaflet with 46 episodes, 46 writers, 46 illustrators, translated into 5 languages. The English newspaper Guardian called it a serial lockdown novel. The rights of the sale of this collection stories will reverse to the Portuguese National Health Service. Soon it will be available in the Canadian and American markets, and hopefully also in Israel. Ana, how did you come up with the idea for the Bode Inspiratório?
Então, queria começar por agradecer a organização deste evento. É uma grande honra participar nesta sessão por Zoom com vários escritores israelitas e também portugueses. Eu sou romancista e o ano passado estive envolvida, aliás fui a promotora de um folhetim que envolveu mais de 100 artistas, portanto estamos a falar de 2020, na altura em que o governo português decidiu fazer um confinamento total. Era o nosso primeiro confinamento, nunca tínhamos passado por algo assim. Os artistas portugueses, os escritores, os artistas plásticos, por exemplo, todos os músicos também ficaram com as agendas, como calcula, completamente canceladas. E a primeira coisa, houve alguém que disse, penso que na televisão, que disse uma frase assim: os nossos sofás serão as nossas trincheiras. Porque se falava muito numa linguagem bélica, temos que vencer este inimigo invencível, vamos vencer esta batalha, vamos todos juntos e tal. E eu pensei, bem, para a batalha um sofá parece-me pouco. O que é que nós podemos fazer, escritores, para ajudar? Em primeiro lugar, se calhar o que eu pensei que seria que era bom continuar com o nosso canal com os leitores, e nada mais fácil do que fazê-lo através das redes sociais, porque é mais direto, porque é mais intuitivo, porque é mais rápido, porque a urgência contava muito neste caso. E depois era um bocado contrariar, como uma espécie de ato de resistência, contrariar aquilo que nos estava a ser imposto, ou seja, quando nos estavam a dizer estejam isolados, nós preferíamos estar coletivamente, cumprido o distanciamento, cada um na sua casa, a fazer um projeto coletivo. Então o projeto coletivo, que se chama Bode Inspiratório, porque este título tem uma carga conotativa, porque é um trocadilho com a expressão bode expiatório e que nós trocamos para bode inspiratório, que tem a ver com inspirar, e que também com o verbo inspirar, que é como se transmite de facto esta doença do Covid. E então a maneira que eu pensei e que seria interessante de nos unirmos todos em torno de algo comum seria fazer um tal folhetim, que era uma coisa que se usava no século XIX, e cada um de nós, cada um escritor, escreveria um episódio e ficava uma coisa assim em cadeia. Portanto, o que eu fiz foi uma carta aberta a todos os escritores que quisessem participar, tendo em conta que haveria uma grande equidade em termos de géneros, de gerações, de estilos, de poesia, de prosa, homens, mulheres, isso tudo estaria contemplado, cada um podia trazer outros, era uma coisa aberta, e depois teríamos só esta ideia de começar com Mário Carvalho e acabar com Luísa Costa Gomes, porque são duas gerações equivalentes em termos literários. No meio pensámos em 40 escritores, porque há um trocadilho que também só funciona em português, que é uma quarentena de 40 escritores, e acabaram por ser 46 porque teve de facto uma adesão muito grande. Toda esta a organização que esteve por trás disto foi uma organização totalmente informal, totalmente amadora, foi feita numa página de Facebook, as pessoas foram se juntando de uma forma também muito informal e muito generosa, não é? Porque nós, era eu e uma equipa de pessoas, mas éramos 6, em que eu tratava da parte dos escritores, havia outro elemento da equipa, que era a Cristina Mota, que tratava da parte dos artistas visuais, que também fizeram uma componente e foram uma componente muito importante deste projeto. Cada artista visual, desde os mais importantes e mais internacionais até aos que estavam em início de carreira, todos os dias apresentavam, tal como os escritores, uma obra original, e depois surgiu um grande interesse não só da parte da imprensa nacional como da imprensa internacional, saíram artigos no The Guardian, saíram artigos na BBC World, saíram na China em sítios improváveis. Acabou por ser um livro cujas receitas revertem para o Serviço Nacional de Saúde. Neste momento os direitos já foram comprados para os Estados Unidos e para o Canadá, e estamos muito orgulhosos por isso.
Thank you. Dorit?
Yeah. I want to introduce Mr. Sami Berdugo, Israeli writer, born in Israel, has published 8 books, novels and short stories, which have won many awards. Born in 1970, when he was 13, his father died. He did his military service at the Golan Heights. Sami Berdugo studied literature and history at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And dear Sami, I want to congratulate you about your last novel, which just won 2 big distinguished awards. One of them is Brenner Award, which is a prize given by us, the Hebrew Writers Association. And at the same time, this same book won the Sapir Prize, one of the most distinguished prizes in Israel. Good evening, Sami.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dorit.
I want to ask you first a question, and then you can go on without any interruption. You said to me that writing is in itself a form of quarantine. What did you mean by that?
Yes. Again, good evening, everyone. Writers from Israel and from Portugal. Good evening, Zvika, Nir, and thank you for this invitation. Like Dorit said when she asked me and told me about this conference about lockdown and writing in lockdown, for me it was a bit, well, I wouldn't say strange, but nothing to talk about actually, because listening and hearing these words of lockdown, and isolation and quarantine, which has quite a bad, or I would say negative meaning, or at least a meaning of depression and sad and all these words that make us feel very lonely and depressed. Think even about this word, lockdown. We are locked and we are down. So it has quite a bad connotation, and things that take us to this state of mind of life is shutting down, actually. But for me, during lockdown, which I spent it most of the time in Berlin, actually. I was in Berlin for nearly 2 years. I had this sort of scholarship by the Senate of Berlin. But even in Israel, I guess if I was in Israel, for me, writing and the act of writing and the state of mind of writing and the physical writing is a lockdown. I am spending most of my days and hours in a lockdown, in my room, hours and hours of sitting on the chair and writing. For me, in many sense, and I said it before, I believe that the writers, we are the writers, are sort of, we're living in a monastery in a way. We are like casted out. We are like spending our life out of society, out of life in a way, because we need to write about life. We need to write and we need to observe life. So in a way, this is what I feel. I am in a constant lockdown. I am experiencing hours of isolation with my words and my characters and my plots. And it's a state of mind, of psychological, mental, and physical state, actually. And it's not something strange to me or new. I don't know if it's good or bad, but if I'm considering this pandemic, I must say that it didn't affect me a lot. Many ask me, do you write now about the pandemic, about this new situation? And I said, no, life for me is the same. And looking at the history, I believe, of classical writers and periods of time, I do believe that the writing has its own power, and it's like dismissing any disaster, like pandemic, like wars, like a nature disaster, like Holocaust. It doesn't mean that we are not writing about it. We do write about pandemic, wars, any other disaster. But I feel that for us, I'm speaking from the point of view of writers, that it doesn't matter actually. And I will keep writing and keep doing my act of writing no matter what. And what was interesting for me is to see and to observe how the non-writers, excuse me for using this word, because for me there are writers and non-writers. We are the writers, and there are the other people who are not writing. And all of a sudden I saw this correlation of the other people who are not writing and saying that they're experiencing this state of mind of isolation and coming into ourselves and being very, very lonely. And they were looking for some sort of solution. What should I do with this? And they were starting to write all of a sudden. So for them, it was isolation. The writing was a sort of solution, but I felt that it was artificial. It didn't come from the real, authentic state of mind of being a writer. What I'm trying to say is that I didn't use or didn't seize this situation of a lockdown and quarantine as a tool to write, because, like I said, writing has its own power, is its own artistic, I would say, power or existential power of continuing writing no matter what. We can write about the disease, but we can write about happiness, love, day-to-day events. It doesn't matter. So for me, I am, I guess, always returning and or staying in my monastery of writing. And I don't know if it would change in the future. And I just will finish in one note that I even, right now I'm still writing and my current manuscript. And I just wrote this maybe 2 or 3 sentences that we shouldn't let any disaster, any pandemic, any things that is really catastrophical, it shouldn't affect the literature or the creation of writings, and us, the writers, as well. So this is my more or less point of view about this lockdown and unlocking the lockdown.
Thank you very much, Sami. I myself personally identify very much with your words. I finished my novel and a manuscript for a film, so I used the time greatly.
Yeah.
Not so nice to say, but yeah. So thank you very much, and we go back to David.
Okay, Matilde Campilho is the author of Jockey, a book of poems that was published in 2014 in Portugal, Brazil, and Spain. And it was considered a watershed moment in Portuguese poetry. She published her second book, Flecha, with short stories in 2020, and is due to publish it in Brazil in 2021. She has had poems, short stories published in both Portuguese and international newspapers, such as Folha de São Paulo, Globo, Público, and also magazines such as Granta, New Observations, Berlin Quarterly, and The Common. She is currently co-hosting a radio show on RTP, the Portuguese National Public Broadcaster. And Matilde, tell me now, you launched a book in the middle of a pandemic outbreak. How was it?
Well, is it on? Yes. Hello. Shalom. Thank you, Dorit Zvika, Your Excellency Jorge Cabral, and thank you, David, for this opportunity. Before talking about the launching of the book, I was listening to them all talking. We reacted in different ways before the book, because I was writing a book, and suddenly I was ending the writing of the book, and this happened. So I stopped. In 2020, I stopped everything that I was doing. Being a writer, the term lockdown apparently is not new to us. We tend to lock down inside our homes, our studios, our offices, even our heads. We write alone. We always write alone. Isolation from others is much needed in that specific moment when we sit down in our chairs to enter the text, to listen to it. I sit down, some writers do work upright. Regardless of the position, our body does need to be alone. Even if the place is crowded with other people, because some writers work in the library, at cafes, or even at home in the kitchen, while some other element of the family is cooking. It doesn't matter. At the time of concentration, you are alone because we write alone, always alone. This is true, but this is not true. The exact moment of writing, of putting down the words we want to put down, working the theme, the plot, the rhythm, the length of a sentence, that we do alone. But that is craft. That is the beginning and the end of writing. In the middle, there is life. Are we not writing when we are out there seeing? Are we at least not working already? Listening to others is part of writing. Watching others as they walk, as they work, as they tender to their kids, or as they are being the kids, is not that also a part of the process of writing? That we lost. As much as almost anyone in the world right now or in the past year, we lost something. Freedom to choose when to be alone or when to be out there is one thing we lost. It doesn't matter if you live in a crowded house or alone with yourself. This was not how we chose it. The lives we had chosen, the ones who were lucky to choose, had little nuances. You lived alone, but you got to see others. You lived with family, big or small, but you did not live with them 24/7. I think it was the nuances we lost, all of us. The element of surprise, the stranger, the other. For a while, we lost the other. We see him on the news, we read about him in newspapers and even in books, but we do not see him. So without the other and without the nuances, we tend to lose ourselves a bit. I did. And now I'm not just talking about writers, because yes, writers lost the world, and so much of us were not able to write. We were too scared, too overwhelmed, too tired, too speechless. Some of us, because I was listening to the other writers and we're all different. We here, me and a lot of friends, we were even counting the ill and the dead, even when we weren't. Perhaps for some writers, the room they inhabited and where they work did not change, but the enormous space inside their head, it did. So many writers during lockdown were not able to write, as we were saying, and I can say I wasn't. I was just trying to cope with this new thing one day at a time. Perhaps I even needed to retract a bit from my previous life, maybe to protect it from this. I wanted to protect my writing, which is for me the safest place. And so I was finishing the book. I stopped. I stopped touching it. I couldn't. I wouldn't for a while. And then, unfortunately or fortunately, we started to adapt, and I launched the book. It's out there. But I just wanted to say, we can talk about the book afterwards, because I know there will be a second part, that this is not, we know that, but I just wanted to, I keep reminding myself that this is not just about writers. It never is. It's about humans, all of us. Even though some of us made big efforts to empathize for a long time, almost a year now, we lost the stranger for a long time. We lost the element of surprise. And again, without the other, without the nuances of life, we tend to lose ourselves, our true self, our writing, but our true self. It is also made of traces, of suggestions, of error, and of experience, of other living bodies. For me, this is another type of lockdown. It is cultural, it is psychological, it is hard to endure, but we will win, because we have to, not just writers, humans.
Humans, yeah. Yeah, thank you, Matilda. That was
I would like to say to Matilda that you explained exactly what I felt all the time. Exactly. Wonderful words. Thank you.
Thank you, speaker.
very well. Dorit.
Yeah, I also want to thank you, Matilda. It was very, very inspiring to think about another angles. Thank you. And I want to introduce Mrs. Galit Dahan Karlibach, novelist and essayist, was born in 1981 in Sderot and lives now in Jerusalem. She published 7 books, recipient of the Prime Minister Prize, the Akum Dvora Omer Award, the National Library of Israel Award, and more. She participated in the IWP in the United States and in the Writers Program in Shanghai. In 2018, she participated in the program for creative women in Alicante, Spain. Good evening, Galit. And I want to ask you, did being quarantined foster loneliness and individualism, or the opposite, enhance collective non-independent thinking? What do you think?
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm locked down by myself because the kids outside, so I'm here. And first of all, I have one recommendation for you. Please don't get divorced in the Corona time, never. Think about the situation that you are just walking the street with 2 kids, want to pass them to their father home, and then 2 policemen ask you, where are you going? And then show your ID. And then I tell them I didn't update my address to the right address. And it was a really a big problems about it. So don't do it. But I want to tell you to talk about the Corona. So in the early days of the Corona, I didn't understand what it was all about. Writers, as Sami said, and more writers, used to be alone. And only at age 32, I flew for the first time in my life. And never felt no shortage, perhaps because I had free plane tickets, virtual, and my writing table as an airport surface that my imagination provided. But after that, when we began to realize that this was something more serious and the tone of the government became anxious and full of panic, I began to think about the isolation and solitude, that it's the one and the really most amazing thing that the Corona has revealed is the inability of people to be alone, but truly alone. As a writer who also loves to read science fiction and fantasy, I always sail in the imagination to the possibility of catastrophe and the end of the world. And as I read in Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, the possibility of being on the marginalized, on the outskirts of cities and memorizing Shakespeare and Homer and the Bible is a possibility that is somehow comforting. So thus there is difference between loneliness and solitude, but as long as I have books, I will never feel really lonely. This is very difficult and challenging year, of course. And for me, you know, Israel, the Israeli society is it's not easy, because maybe this is a price of get out of Egypt and from Pharaoh. So the thinking is very communal. Israeli very like to say that they are non-conformist, but especially in times like this of a war or a pandemic, the communal thinking is very strong. So I think that there is something very comforting when you can just dive into a book and just to lock you inside, outside of the world. and I can almost recognize at a glance people who belong to books kind, or the screen people. So the book people can be with themselves, can concentrate. I was amazed last year when I heard about survey that they ask people if they want they want to give up Netflix or to be married or to have a relationship with someone, and most of the people didn't want to give up Netflix. I was surprised, I have to say. But I think that, so when we talk about individually, as you asked me, Dorit, so the rule as a government, not only the totalitarian like Stalin, that we know that he killed many writers, but government, ruler in general, don't like writers, because writer has their own way to think. It's a private, reading is a private act. You can watch Netflix, you can watch TV, you can watch films together. This is a collective acting, but to read it's something really private, and you need to own your imagination and to imagine what can be in the next, how the future can be seen. So I just want to finish that if we talk about writer and solitude, so immediately I remember the Roman philosopher and great writer Seneca, who was sent to Corsica, an island, by Claudius. And from there, he wrote beautiful letters to his mother, to friends, etc. And I think it was really, really loneliness and solitude together. But I think when you are surrounded books, you can't really feel it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Galit, and thanks all the writers for the really inspiring and different angles which reach us and makes us think and retrospective of everything. And to you, David.
I thought of doing a second round. Of course, I want to go back to Jose, but Jose, you can always, react to what you just heard. I was going to actually ask you a little bit about Israel and your relationship to Israel, since you are published here in Israel. I was going to ask you how, since, you've been here, and I was going to ask you what's your relationship to the Israeli readers, but I'm going to leave it up to you where you want to start. If you want to react, or if you just want to go back, move now a little bit to Israel.
Well, it's a bit difficult to react because there were so many things being said. I, in a certain way, relate to all of them, even though sometimes they're different. But I think this has been a period of contradicting feelings also. Personally, I cannot say that I have faced this time with an optimistic or a pessimistic view. There are days, some days I'm more optimistic than others. Some days I view things in a way, some days I see them in a completely different way. Some days literature, reading and writing is enough to kind of shield me from this. Some days it isn't. So I feel that this is I think that in a certain way, literature always needs a certain distance to form a perspective. And regarding this situation, we are still surrounded by it. We are still in it. It's very difficult to create a view that will describe it in the future. I'm not sure that we can do it yet, because as I see it, it has taken me by surprise. I mean, probably there were many signs that something like this could happen, but I was living in an illusion. I never imagined that we, as a world, would go through something like this. Regarding Israel, I have this beautiful thing, which is my novel in Hebrew. I mean, it's a bit unfair to show the cover, because I feel what's really beautiful is this. The thing that amazes me the most is to see the pages inside, to imagine that out of this beautifully aesthetic signs, words can be read, because unfortunately I cannot read Hebrew. And
there is
also,
a different smell.
Sorry?
There's a different smell to the pages.
for the book?
Yeah.
I guess so. But it's incredible, because when books are translated from Portuguese into Hebrew, then they are read in a different direction. That is such a metaphor, I think. And at the same time, it's so incredible that words, characters, all dimensions of text survive this going from one dimension to another dimension. And so it's amazing. I had the chance to be in Israel, unfortunately, very briefly. I was at the Jerusalem Book Fair, and so I only had the chance to be in Jerusalem. It was a huge impact, of course. Jerusalem is a center, one of the centers of the world, and that was amazing. And it's a memory that I treasure. But I feel that there is a lot more to discover in Israel, namely Tel Aviv, that I've heard it's completely different, and of course other aspects of the country. I also have a few friends from Israel that I've met here in Portugal and elsewhere in the world, and of course it's the Hebrew culture. It's a very strong culture, and also a very strong literature. And as a consumer of culture and of literature, it has been important in a number of levels. But I feel regarding Israel, I feel that for me personally, there is still a lot to discover. I mean, there is still a work to be done by me to go deeper and to interpret in a deeper level. But because I feel that internationally speaking, and it happens with Israel and of course with other countries and cultures also, we tend to simplify and to oversimplify things that are very complex. I feel that that this vision is opposite to literature. Literature doesn't simplify, or it simplifies, but it simplifies recognizing the complexity. And that's how I feel about Israel. I feel there is a lot of complexity. Before we started, some of you were speaking in Hebrew, and it's such an amazing melody. And I listen to it, but of course I don't understand a word. And or sometimes I suspect that I understand a word here and there. And that's a bit how I feel about Israel. the few days that I spent in Jerusalem, they were overwhelming. And honestly, I hope that I will soon have a chance to go back there and to deepen my knowledge of Israel.
I would like to ask you something, your permission. Who translated your book? Miriam Tivon?
Unfortunately, I don't know who translated the book.
Okay.
I cannot read it. Probably it's written here. I don't know.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
No, it's not. Sorry, I cannot say.
It's okay.
The second question I want to ask, with your permission, David.
Go ahead.
Our colleagues from Portugal. All of you are from Lisbon, or some of you are outside of Lisbon, like Porto or other towns. And because in Israel, there's a difference. If you are in a big city like Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, or which we call the periphery.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm about 10 kilometers away from the center of Lisbon, but one thing that is very important for me is that I'm original from the interior of Portugal, from the south interior, not far from the border with Spain. And so I have actually even written a lot about rural life in the interior of Portugal.
Matilde?
I live in Lisbon nowadays, but as José Luís, I lived outside of Lisbon, like an hour in a rural place in Ribatejo for all my life. And then I lived in Brazil, then I lived in Spain, then I'm in Lisbon for 6 years. I did not grow up here, and I think that makes a bit of a difference growing up in an urban center or outside. Even for a writer, the stories you hear, then the stories you tell, very different in rural life or in the city.
Let me see if we can find Ana Margarida. Ana Margarida, are you there? Está ahí? Ana Margarida?
So maybe I can ask the Israeli writers if one of you has something to say related to Portugal.
Well, the only thing I can say, sorry.
Yeah, Sami, go ahead.
Is that, well, I never visited Portugal, and I would like to visit especially Lisbon or Lisboa, I think they say. And I think it's mostly because of my big empathy and my really love and interest in Pessoa, Fernando Pessoa. I remember when I first read his book, which was translated to Hebrew, the book of, I don't know if it's the right translation, the book of Uncomfort, that was translated in Bavel, a publisher's house here in Israel, which is a quite large book. I was quite amazed and moved by this text of Pessoa. These are fragments of thoughts and walking down the streets, and it's about the writing itself. And I still today read it to the students that I'm teaching. And for me, he is really capturing the essence, I guess, I don't know, maybe I'm mistaken, because the Portuguese people can maybe tell me it's not that, but for me, he's really capturing, I don't know, the essence of the streets, of the markets, of the people, and also the human beings and the existing and the writing itself. So, and for me, it's a sort of a Bible, I must say, because the wonderful thing about this book is that I can open it in any page that I want and just read. There is no continuity, or I'm not obliged to any plot or any character. It's just fragments, and it's beautiful. And I would really like to visit Lisbon because of Fernando Pessoa. I also know, of course, Saramago, but this is my knowledge of Portugal, and I just saying that I keep hearing and from people all over Israel that they recommended me, go ahead, do this Portuguese passport. I mean, your name, it's obviously, I mean, you're in the top of the list because Verdugo, my last name, is definitely a Spanish name. It's by the meaning. It's my family is from this the Spanish 14th century, and the meaning of the name, one of the meaning of the name is actually Verdugo. I think it's V, not B, which is a hanger. People who hang people. So the man who is hanging the people. So
profession.
Still, I'm not doing anything with that. I didn't apply for a Portuguese passport. Maybe one day. Yeah.
But let me pick up on what Sami is saying here, because Mathilde dedicated a poem on her first book, Jockey, to the Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai. And I want to ask her where she found him and what's her relationship with Yehuda Amichai's literature.
Yehuda, he was translated into Portuguese. We know him here. He's one of the main influences in that book Jockey that are written. He was wonderfully translated here. I think I've read him also in English, so I think it's right, the translation. And I did not dedicate it to him. I stole a verse from him. I put it in italics.
Say it.
And I don't have it here. I'm sorry. You should have told me. I don't have the book here.
No. I said don't say it. Don't say you stole it.
No, but it's in italics. It's in italics,
Okay,
and I go from his verse, and I do the construction of my poem.
But I see the ambassador's wife have the book, right?
Does she have the book?
Yeah, she shows something, and I presume this is the book.
Oh,
that's the book. That's Jockey. Yes, that's the book. Yeah.
Well, perfect.
Yeah, I would like to add, if it's okay.
Yeah, Shifra, please.
Yeah, I would like to say that I actually lived in Portugal for a while. It was many years ago. It was during the 80s. I was the educational officer of the World Union of Jewish Students when I read a book about the Marranos, about the Jews that converted to Christianity and lived far away from the center of from Lisbon in a place called Belmonte. Actually, I was the first Israeli going there, yes, and I organized a seminar for students from Spain, Portugal, Ceuta, Melilla, and Gibraltar inside the village. It was in 1981. And a few years later, the whole village converted to Judaism. And I was invited when they built the new synagogue in about 500 years in Belmonte. And I've been there a few years ago, and I felt like a VIP because all the people of the village knew me and called me over there. So I have a very, very strong affiliation with Portugal, especially because of the fact that statistics shows that almost 1/3 of Portuguese population have Jewish blood, and it's a bond between the Portuguese and Israel, between Portuguese and Judaism, and I always felt at home in Portugal. As Sami Bardugo said, I'm liable to have a Portuguese passport as well, because my ancestors came from one part of my family. I'm half Ashkenazi and half Sephardi, but my ancestors came from Spain. My big ancestor was Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. They found it about me, and in 1492, yes. They went to North Africa, and from there they came back to Israel. And so my affiliation with the Portuguese people is very strong, and I really thank you for inviting me. I don't think it was a coincidence that you invited me for such an interesting session, and I would like to thank all of you.
Oh, perfect.
You're welcome.
Oh, Dorit, you want to say something before we close?
No, I want to say thank you for everyone. It was very rich and fruitful, and I have a lot to think about now. So I thank everybody, and yeah,
Okay.
I hope to continue the relationship we just started.
Indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of our soiree. I would like to thank our distinguished authors for being with us tonight, and all the literature admirers for your attendance. Many thanks to the Hebrew Writers Association in Israel for their hospitality, to the Embassy of Portugal in Israel, especially to Dra. Laura Oliva and Dra. Joana Araújo, and the Camões Institute of Language and Culture for supporting this event. Good evening, Erev Tov, and boa noite.